At Willowridge High, no one remembered her name. She was the girl behind the locker door. The footsteps no one heard. The quiet breath swallowed in the noise of cheerleaders and high society children. While others counted how many followers reposted their prom dresses, she counted stitches. One thread for each whisper that told her she didn't belong. Her name was Emily Carter, and to most people, she didn't exist. Not until the night that changed everything. This is not a story about glass slippers or magic spells. It's not about a makeover or revenge. It's about a girl who walked into a storm wearing a dress she sewed with her own hands, threaded with hope, with pain, and with everything she had left. And when the most adored boy in school crossed the room in front of everyone and held out a single white flower, the world finally asked, who is she? But the real question is, will she believe she deserves to be seen? This is the story of a girl who stopped waiting to be chosen and chose herself first. Stay with us, because what happens next will change how you see the quiet ones forever. In the sprawling corridors of Willowridge High, where teenage dreams collided with harsh realities, Emily Carter existed in the spaces between conversations, those forgotten pauses where silence held more weight than words. She moved through the hallways like morning mist, present yet unnoticed, substantial yet somehow translucent to the eyes of her peers, who sparkled with the confidence that comes from belonging somewhere, anywhere, in the intricate social tapestry of American high school life. The cruel arithmetic of adolescence had long since calculated her worth, and she had been found wanting. While her classmates lived in a world painted in vibrant hues of acceptance and inclusion, Emily inhabited the muted grays of invisibility. No name rolled off anyone's tongue when making plans. No phone buzzed with invitations. No excited whispers included her in the sacred ritual of prom preparation that consumed the spring months like a fever. Around her, the hallways transformed into a runway of teenage aspiration. Girls clutched powder-pink envelopes containing formal invitations as if they were golden tickets to paradise itself. They spoke in breathless excitement about gowns that cost more than Emily's family spent on groceries in 3 months, about limousines that would carry them like modern-day Cinderellas to their magical night. The air itself seemed to shimmer with their anticipation, heavy with the perfume of dreams coming true and the electric energy of youth convinced of its own immortality. But Emily Carter had learned to find beauty in the margins, to create magic with her own hands when the world refused to offer it freely. In the quiet sanctuary of her bedroom, under the gentle glow of a thrift store lamp, she bent over fabric purchased with carefully saved allowance money, remnants and discounted bolts from the clearance section that others had deemed unworthy. Each stitch she placed was an act of quiet rebellion, a declaration that beauty could emerge from humble beginnings, that worth wasn't measured by price tags or social approval. Her fingers, calloused from countless hours of needlework, moved with the precision of someone who understood that perfection was not given but earned. The dress taking shape beneath her hands was more than mere clothing. It was armor fashioned from hope, a testament to the belief that she deserved beauty even if no one else could see it. The fabric whispered stories of resilience as she worked, transforming discarded material into something that would make her feel worthy of existing in spaces that had never welcomed her. The hallway conversations that swirled around her like toxic smoke carried the casual cruelty that teenagers wielded without thought for the wounds they inflicted. Can you even imagine her at prom? The words floated through the air with the careless brutality of those who had never known rejection. She'd probably have to sew herself a date, too. The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut glass, sharp enough to slice through whatever remained of a vulnerable heart. Emily absorbed these verbal blows with the practiced grace of someone who had learned that responding only amplified the pain. She had mastered the art of making herself smaller, of occupying less space in rooms where she wasn't wanted, of breathing quietly so as not to remind others of her unwelcome presence. Each cruel comment became another thread in the tapestry of her invisibility, weaving her deeper into the background of other people's lives. Yet in the depths of her school locker, tucked between textbooks worn thin by countless students before her, lay a piece of paper that had yellowed with age and handling. The words written in fading ink had become her secret psalm, her private prayer. You are strong, Whiting, and no one can take that away from you. She had found this note years ago, left by some anonymous angel who understood that sometimes salvation comes in the form of 11 simple words that remind us of truths we had forgotten about ourselves. The sanctuary she found at home was built not of walls, but of love, the unconditional, unwavering love of her grandmother, Rose, whose weathered hands held more warmth than all the popular crowds at school combined. In Rose's presence, Emily could shed the weight of invisibility and remember what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. The kitchen where they shared their evening talks was a haven where worth wasn't measured by social status or prom invitations, but by the content of one's character and the kindness in one's heart. Nobody asked me to prom, Grandma Rose, Emily whispered into the gentle evening light that filtered through faded curtains, her voice carrying the accumulated weight of every rejection, every overlooked moment, every time she had been made to feel less than worthy of love and celebration. Maybe it's because I'm not worth being seen. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, heavy with the poison of internalized rejection that had seeped into her bones over months and years of being dismissed. Rose's smile bloomed like a flower finding sunlight in the darkness, soft and knowing and filled with the wisdom that comes from living through storms and finding rainbows on the other side. Her voice, when it came, carried the gentle strength of generations of women who had faced adversity and emerged with grace and tact. Sometimes, my dear child, life is simply sending its invitations through unconventional routes. The most beautiful doors often open when we least expect them to, and the most precious gifts arrive wrapped in packages we never thought to look for. Her words hung in the air like a promise, a whispered suggestion that perhaps Emily's story was still being written, and perhaps the best chapters were yet to come. While Emily continued to navigate her world as a living ellipsis, present but unfinished, meaningful but unread, someone had begun to hear the music that played softly within her silence. In the intricate ecosystem of Willow Ridge High, where social hierarchies shifted like tectonic plates and teenage royalty reigned with casual cruelty, there existed a young man who wore his crown reluctantly, as if it were made of thorns rather than gold. Landon Hayes carried the weight of expectation like an invisible yoke across his broad shoulders, each step through the hallways accompanied by whispers of his destined greatness. The son of a tech mogul whose fortune had been built on algorithms and ambition, Landon had inherited more than his father's striking jawline and piercing blue eyes. He had inherited a future written in the language of inevitability. Prom King was not a possibility, but a foregone conclusion, as certain as the sunrise that would illuminate his family's sprawling estate in the hills above the city. Yet beneath the surface perfection that made classmates stumble over their words and teachers soften their criticism, Landon harbored a profound exhaustion that ran deeper than teenage angst or senior year burnout. He was drowning in the shallow waters of popularity, suffocated by conversations that sparkled with empty wit and interactions that felt as hollow as movie sets. All facade, no foundation. The hugs that greeted him in hallways carried the mechanical warmth of social obligation, and the laughter that followed his jokes rang with the calculated pitch of those seeking favor, rather than expressing genuine mirth. The world expected him to be grateful for his golden existence, to revel in the attention and adoration that followed him like shadows. Instead, he found himself searching for something authentic in a landscape of manufactured experiences, something real in a world that seemed increasingly artificial. His life felt like a performance in which he had forgotten his lines, where everyone else seemed to know the script except him. It was in the unlikely sanctuary of AP Literature class that the universe shifted on its axis for Landon Hayes. While his classmates fidgeted with anticipation for lunch period and Friday night football games, something extraordinary was unfolding in the front of the classroom. Emily Carter, the girl who had perfected the art of occupying space without claiming it, stood before them with a worn paperback clutched in her trembling hands. The poem she had chosen was Edgar Allan Poe's lesser-known work, Silence, a piece that seemed to mirror her own existence in its exploration of solitude and the spaces between words. Her voice began as barely more than a whisper, tremulous and uncertain, as if she were sharing secrets with the air itself. But as the verses unfolded, something magical happened. Her voice found its strength, each syllable gaining weight and purpose, transforming from hesitation into something approaching reverence. She spoke of silence not as absence, but as presence, the kind of profound quiet that holds more truth than 1,000 conversations. Her words painted pictures of solitude that felt less like loneliness and more like communion with something greater than the noise of everyday existence. As she read, her invisible armor fell away, revealing glimpses of the vibrant soul that lived beneath layers of protective invisibility. Landon found himself leaning forward in his seat, drawn by a magnetism he had never experienced before. While his classmates checked their phones or doodled in notebook margins, he was completely captivated by this girl who had somehow managed to make silence sing. She wasn't performing for approval or fishing for compliments. She was simply sharing something beautiful because beauty deserved to be shared, regardless of whether anyone was listening. She's not trying to be seen, he thought, the realization hitting him with unexpected force. And that's exactly what makes her more visible than anyone else in this room. In a world where everyone was shouting for attention, Emily's quiet authenticity was revolutionary. From that moment forward, Landon began to notice Emily everywhere, not because she had suddenly become visible, but because he had finally learned to see. He started appearing in the spaces where she sought refuge from the harsh fluorescent lights of popularity, the forgotten corner of the library where dust motes danced in afternoon sunbeams, the weathered bleachers behind the gymnasium where she ate lunch alone while reading worn paperbacks, the back row of classrooms where she could observe without being observed. He left small offerings of connection, handwritten notes that appeared in her locker like messages from a benevolent ghost. "You don't need spotlights to shine," one read, the words carefully crafted to bypass her defenses without triggering her fears. Another simply asked, "Do you see the world in shades of blue the way I do?" as if he were inviting her into a secret language that only they could understand. Emily's world tilted off its axis with each discovered note. Her carefully constructed understanding of her place in the universe suddenly called into question. Why would someone like Landon Hayes, heir apparent to teenage royalty, destined for greatness, blessed with a kind of effortless charisma that opened doors before he even knocked, why would he notice her, the pragmatic part of her mind, hardened by years of social rejection, whispered warnings about elaborate pranks and cruel bets made by bored rich kids looking for entertainment? But there was something in the careful formation of his handwriting, something in the thoughtful choice of words that spoke to her heart in a language she had almost forgotten how to speak. These weren't the careless scribbles of someone fulfilling a dare. They were love letters to her authentic self, written by someone who had somehow seen through her cloak of invisibility and found her worthy of attention. The moment arrived with the casual brutality that only high school cafeterias can deliver. A public arena where social hierarchies played out with gladiatorial intensity under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. The lunch period buzzed with its usual symphony of teenage chaos, plastic trays clattering against metal tables, voices rising in animated conversation, the sharp percussion of sneakers against polished linoleum floors. It was in this ecosystem of controlled pandemonium that Emily had learned to make herself as small as possible, occupying a corner table near the emergency exit where she could eat her homemade sandwich in relative peace while losing herself in the pages of whatever novel currently served as her escape route from reality. The whispers started before she even saw him coming. Like ripples in a pond, awareness of Landon Hayes' unusual behavior spread through the cafeteria with the velocity of wildfire. Students craned their necks to watch as he made his way through the maze of tables, his typical entourage conspicuously absent, his destination unclear until the shocking moment when he stopped at Emily's isolated table. The collective intake of breath was audible. Hundreds of teenagers suddenly united in their disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. In his hand, he carried a single white flower. Not the elaborate bouquet that prom proposals typically demanded, but something far more precious in its simplicity. It was a daisy, its petals pristine and tender, the kind of wildflower that grew in forgotten corners of the world where beauty bloomed without permission or applause. The contrast was striking. This young man who had everything the teenage heart could desire, approaching this girl who had learned to expect nothing, carrying a flower that cost less than the designer water bottle clipped to his backpack. The silence that fell over their immediate vicinity was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the cafeteria continuing its chaotic ballet at tables far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about eavesdropping. Emily looked up from her book, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom, her mind racing through 1,000 possible explanations for this unprecedented moment. Landon didn't deliver a speech. He didn't perform for the audience that had gathered like vultures sensing carry-on. Instead, he simply placed the flower on the scarred surface of the cafeteria table, its white petals a stark contrast against the institutional gray of the plastic surface. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet intensity of someone sharing sacred truths in profane spaces. "Because you've been brave," he said, the words falling like stones into the silence that surrounded them. While the rest of the world chose to be cruel, the simplicity of his statement carried more weight than 1,000 elaborate declarations, more power than all the grand gestures that typically mark such moments. "Because I finally learned how to see you." Emily's world contracted to this single point in space and time. This table, this flower, this impossible moment when the boy who could have anyone was choosing her. The logical part of her mind scrambled for explanations, for the hidden cameras or the elaborate prank that would make sense of this scenario. But her heart, that battered organ that had learned to expect disappointment, began to whisper dangerous things about possibility and worth. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. "Are you asking me to prom?" The question carried years of longing and equal measures of terror. The words of someone who had dreamed of this moment while simultaneously convincing herself it would never arrive. Landon's response came with the gentle precision of a surgeon operating on wounded dreams. "No," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking if you can believe that you deserve to be seen." The distinction was everything. This wasn't about a single night of borrowed glamour, but about something far more fundamental, the radical act of recognizing her own worth. That evening, when Emily stepped through the doors of the Grand Ballroom at the Willowridge Country Club, the universe held its breath. The transformation wasn't the stuff of fairy tale makeovers. No team of stylists had descended upon her with professional magic. Instead, what the assembled crowd witnessed was something far more profound, a girl who had finally stopped hiding from her own beauty. The dress that had consumed her evenings for weeks hung on her frame like liquid sky, a pale blue that captured the color of dawn breaking over still water. Every stitch had been placed with the devotion of a craftsman creating art, every seam aligned with the precision of someone who understood that perfection was not about cost, but about care. Her hair, freed from its usual utilitarian ponytail, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars from the vaulted ceiling. But it was her eyes that truly marked the transformation, no longer downcast or darting away from contact. They held steady and clear, reflecting the overhead lights like twin mirrors that no longer feared what they might reveal. She had not come to this place to impress or to prove anything to the classmates who had spent 4 years overlooking her existence. She had come to claim space in a world that had never offered her any, to stand in her own truth regardless of who might be watching. The ballroom, decorated with the kind of understated elegance that money could buy but taste had to earn, fell into a hush as she moved through it. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne flutes froze halfway to lips, and for a moment that stretched like taffy in the warm air. Time itself seemed to stumble. This was not the Emily Carter who had ghosted through their hallways. This was someone entirely new, someone who had always existed beneath the surface but had never been given permission to emerge. When Landon approached her, his own formal wear crisp and perfectly tailored, his hand extended in invitation, she felt the familiar flutter of panic in her chest. "I've never danced," she whispered, the confession carrying the weight of 1,000 missed opportunities, 1,000 moments when she had watched from the sidelines while others lived the experiences she had convinced herself were not meant for her. His smile held no judgment, no condescension, only the gentle understanding of someone who recognized courage in all its forms. "But you've survived things far more terrifying than a first dance," he replied, his words carrying the truth she had forgotten about herself. "Compared to everything you've already overcome, this is nothing." They moved onto the dance floor with the awkward grace of teenagers learning to navigate adult emotions, their steps imperfect, but sincere. Emily stumbled once, twice, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment, but Landon's steady presence kept her grounded, his quiet encouragement more valuable than professional instruction. They spun in circles that were more enthusiastic than elegant, but something magical happened in those imperfect moments. Emily began to laugh. The sound surprised them both, rich and genuine and completely unguarded. It rose above the carefully orchestrated soundtrack of the evening like birdsong at dawn. For the first time in her 18 years, Emily was not afraid of being seen. She lifted her face toward his, the question that had haunted her for weeks finally finding its voice. "Why me?" she asked, the words carrying the accumulated weight of every rejection, every moment of invisibility, every time she had wondered if she would ever matter to anyone beyond her grandmother's kitchen table. "Out of everyone you could have chosen, why me?" Landon's answer came without hesitation, as if he had been waiting his entire life to speak these particular words to this particular person. "Because you're real," he said, his voice cutting through the orchestrated perfection that surrounded them. "In a world full of people pretending to be something they're not, you're the only person who's brave enough to just be yourself." That night, the girl no one noticed became the heartbeat of the room, not because she danced like a queen, not because she wore diamonds, but because she carried herself like someone who had already survived the worst things silence could say. Her name was whispered now, not in pity, not in mockery, but in awe. And yet, Emily didn't ask for applause. She didn't ask for anyone to rewrite the cruelty. She didn't need the past to be erased, because she had become someone new, not despite the pain, but because of it. She sat beneath the stars, hand in hand with the beau who saw through everything fake. And when he gave her a simple ring, not a promise of forever, but a promise to truly see her, she didn't cry, she smiled. Because for the first time, she did see herself too. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever stitched your own worth in secret, remember you don't need permission to matter. You don't need a crowd to claim your place. And sometimes the loudest courage is simply choosing to show up. If this story touched your heart, tell us where you're watching from and type 100 in the comments to let us know you're still here.